Hello, my name is Niels Pfleging. Today I would like to talk about a history of time oriented work systems in 8 books. Uh, the field of time oriented organizations, or time based organizations, as it was once called, it's not, it's fairly recent, really, and it's not that there'd be a lot of literature about it, a lot of books about it. That's why I only have 8 books to talk about the history of time-oriented work systems. At least these are the books that I have identified and read so far. There might be others that I will figure out over time, stumble upon over time. But for this video, I identified 8 books that I would like to, talk about. What drew me to this work on time-oriented work systems was this insight around time orientation that led to the publication of this research paper, Slave to the Rhythm, Adopt Time-Oriented Work Systems Now. I published this research paper in June 2025, very recently, and of course, this topic took me a long time to wrap my head around it. The history of Toyota, the history of the big three time-oriented work systems approaches that are out there. And after publishing the paper, I went deeper. I tried to find even more content about it. So that's why, since the publication of the paper, I stumbled upon a few other sources, that I didn't really focus on in the research paper. And I must admit, I've figured out a few expressions or framings, and also I think I figured out a little more how the topic of time orientation evolved over time. And the first book that I found about time orientation is a very interesting one. I think a very good one also. And uh, I will go through the 8 books chronologically. So this is the first one because it was published first in 1990. So 35 years ago, that's where the history of time orientation begins in my mind, if we talk about books, of course. In this video, again, I will only talk about books. Of course, there have been occasional articles that were published before or in between that I will not mention explicitly. I will only focus on those 8 books. And the first book to mention is Competing Against Time: How Time-Based Competition is Reshaping Global Markets. Again, published in 1990. The cover looks a bit dated, even, but I got a very nice, very fresh copy. And the authors are George Stork Jr. and Thomas M. Hout. George Stork Jr., I would say he's the main author of the book. He's still around. He's a retired partner, still an advisor apparently for Boston Consulting Group. He had a long career in Boston Consulting Group. So he's a real veteran of management consulting. Let's say after Bruce Henderson, I think the founder of Boston Consulting Group. George Stork is maybe one of the superstars that the company produced. And in 1990, George Stork wrote this book, which became a bestseller. I hear that it is still a very popular book even today. So it may still be in print. I doubt that, but you get used copies if you like. I hear that this is still widely read within Amazon, for example, Competing Against Time. So, what's interesting about this is that George Stork, in 1988, I think he published a Harvard Business Review article that was about time-based competition. Very successful, very influential article. So he followed up with this entire book. The book is pretty insightful. I would say that there are some company stories, company cases that I do not like, I do not love. It's the kind of there's. I mean, this book is 35 years old, but there's already this kind of consultant book storytelling in it. So you will find a lot of cases that I do not find that interesting, but overall, it's a good book that even gives you a few hints at the big three time-oriented work systems approaches. So Mr. Stork really anticipates much of it. There are fine, it's fine comparisons between conventional companies and time-oriented companies. And what's so why this book is so important, so interesting as well, is that Mr. Stork single-handedly invented time orientation as a topic, because even at Toyota nobody really talked about this systematically. If you look at Taiichi Ohno's books, for example, the first I think was called Just in Time. It doesn't talk a lot about time orientation. It talks about organizing manufacturing for flow, but it's not so very time oriented. So George Stork, in my mind, he's a superhero in having invented the field of time-oriented organizing, and having thought deeply about it, and even producing a good book with lots of interesting insights, even around how to make the transformation for time orientation. It's not bad what Mr. Stork writes in the later chapters of this book about how to make this kind of transformation. So this is a very good primer, really. It's the first Bible of time-oriented work systems, I would say. Very readable. To me, as a reader, 1/3 of the book would have sufficed, and there are parts of the book that I do not need. But it's quite a feat, I think, what George Stork and his co-author Thomas Hout accomplished here with his book. So, recommended reading. What happened is that this book became such a big bestseller, such a hit. Mr. Stork is still, I think, praised and even retired, still in demand because he became famous. He wrote another. George Stork wrote a few other books about management. I mean, he was a consultant for decades at Boston Consulting Group, so he wrote other books, but they are not about time orientation that much. So I think this is by far the best book to talk about when we contemplate time orientation. But the success of George Stork's book produced ripple effects and caused other people to also, dedicate themselves to the topic. And there were work groups in the United States, dedicated to time orientation, or that became dedicated to time orientation. And one such work group actually produced a book as well. And this book came out 1 year later, 1 year after George Stork's book, in 1991. It's called Time-Based Competition, the Next Battleground in American Manufacturing. This is a very different book compared to George Stork's title, because this is a collection of articles. The editor is Joseph D. Blackburn. He also produced a couple of articles before publishing this book, if I'm not mistaken. So Mr. Blackburn got influenced by George Stork's work and produced this book, only a year or so after George Stork's book. Why? Because why did it so happen? Why was this book published so quickly after the first book I mentioned was published? Because the Harvard Business Review article that I mentioned, which was published in '88, that is what spawned this book as well. Yeah, so it was not the book competing against Time by George Stork that spurned this thinking, but the previous articles. So 1991, this book was published, and it features articles by several different authors, lots of cases which I find have not dated so well, but there are a couple of interesting articles in this book, which is why if you are really, really interested in the topic of time orientation, you might find this interesting. In particular, there's a great article by Roger W. Schmenner. There's also an article in this book about the strategic value of time by George Stork himself. That's very interesting. There is an article by Joseph Blackburn about quick response manufacturing in the apparels industry. So there are a couple of interesting bits and pieces in here. Yeah? If you ask me, I think that this book by George Stork is much, much stronger, much more interesting. But if you're looking for completeness, if you really want to understand the whole topic and how it evolved over time, this subtitle Time-Based Competition by Blackburn, Joseph Blackburn, might also be interesting for you. So this is like the first generation of writings on time orientation, starting in the beginning of the 1990s. And I think this wave of interest at the start of the 1990s happened also as a response to the total quality movement, the beginning of the lean movement, the response to, of course, the one the Toyota story hugely impacted this topic in general, and then the publication of the book, the third revolution in the automotive industry, and so on, came about. So there is a reason why at the beginning of the 1990s, this interest in time orientation began. What I find so interesting about this first generation of authors, George Stork and Joseph Blackburn, all these researchers, consultants, authors, what I find so interesting, in particular about George Stork's book, is that he was the first to frame that time was a whole area of competing, and that competing through time would also mean competing on cost in a better way, competing on adaptiveness and agility in a better way, and that by focusing on time, you would also improve quality, reduce cost, improve effectiveness. So I think this is the beginning of really, really an important new school of thinking. And now we come to the people who picked up on this, or who put this in practice. And this is an author. I mentioned him a great deal in the Slave to the Rhythm research paper. He developed the quick response manufacturing approach. His name is Rajan Zuri, and he published in 2012, I think he published this wonderful book. In 2010, okay, 2010, so almost 2 decades forward, Rajan Zuri published this book. It's about time, the competitive advantage of quick response manufacturing. Again, this is about gaining competitive advantage, but this is much more about compressing lead time, compressing throughput, compressing the use of time, and turning it into a competitive weapon, and also as a driver of effectiveness, lowering cost. By the way, one thing that I found, the only book I think that also mentions that being faster should enable you to raise your prices. I think the first book, the book by George Stork, also mentioned this strategy. Be faster, you can charge more from your customers, because customers appreciate punctual, on-time, fast delivery. So interesting ideas that came about with thinking about time and time orientation. And of course, Rajan Zuri, with the quick response manufacturing approach, he is even stronger in conceptualizing this for industrial companies, where George Stork remains a bit abstract at times, in how to make this happen in manufacturing. Rajan Zuri becomes very specific. This is not Rajan Zuri's only book about time orientation, but I think it is his main, most elegant, let's say, most compressed version of writing about this. So this is highly recommended. It's About Time by Rajan Zuri. Through one of the books that I already mentioned, I found out only 1 or 2 weeks ago. I found out about this other author, Roger Schmenner, and he's a professor. He's a real academic. I mean, Rajan Zuri is also an academic. Was an academic. He's retired now as a professor. Roger Schmenner is also a retired professor by now. And I must say, I love the book that I will recommend. This is also from 2012. The book is called Getting and Staying Productive. Now, that doesn't sound very much like time orientation, but the subtitle gives it away. Applying Swift Even Flow to Practice. So Swift Even Flow, let's say that this way of framing time orientation as Swift Even Flow, that's Mr. Schmenner's idea. Of course, since Toyota, since Lean, time orientation has always called popular. It became popular to call time orientation flow, or to refer to it as first as just in time, and then as flow, but you can also call it pull systems and so on. And Roger Schmenner calls it swift even flow, which is very important. All these, these three words: swift flow and even flow, which relates to the Hey Juncker notion of leveled production and so on, but a little more still. Applying swift even flow to practice, that should have been the main title, I think, but that's what book publishers do. So this was published with Cambridge University Press. Roger W. Schmenner. This, I must say, it's an amazing book. I only read it yesterday or the day before. It is super sharp. It is well written. It is practical. It is insightful. It is, groundbreaking, I would say. It is a very, very good book on time orientation. Maybe you know, it compares to Rajan Zuri's work. It compares to George Stork's work. Excellent book. It's a little overpriced, I think, but you should get it if you are interested in time orientation and in lean, and in how to make time oriented work systems happen. I think this is an excellent book. What I love about this book is that Roger Schmenner, he's still around, by the way. He manages to combine insightful theory and cases. He cites a lot of cases, and in fact some beta codex companies as well that we appreciate, like Nucor. So the theory is there, the cases are there, the consistent reflection and the practical advice. This book has several lists of how to put swift even flow into place. So yeah, I think this is a pretty amazing book. I hope to be able to talk with Roger Schmenner about this work, about his work on time orientation soon. I also hope to be able to talk to George Stork if that's possible. So we will reach out to them. Highly recommended book, excellent book. Roger Schmenner, getting and staying productive, applying swift even flow to practice. Now you may wonder, okay, I started in the 1990s. Why didn't I mention a Toyota book so far? There was no mention of Taiichi Ono yet, right? Where does it come? And it comes now. This is the book about Toyota I recommend. The thing about Taiichi Ono's own books, and why I did not mention his books in this video, is that I think Taiichi Ono's own book, including workplace management, they are not very telling about time orientation. Of course, they are inseparable from time orientation. Yeah, but in those books, Taiichi Ono, even in the Just in Time book, I think his first book that Taiichi Ono published together with a co-author, a journalist, you do not find much about proper thinking about time orientation. I think it's very hard to find something in the common lean literature about proper time orientation. At least I maybe I overlooked it. So please correct me if I'm wrong, and if I overlooked something, let me know. If you tell me, there's this great lean book that you might have missed, please tell me. I'm not saying this is a complete list of books, but the one book about Toyota and Taiichi Ono that I would pick for a relatively strong relationship to time orientation is this: Management Lessons from Taiichi Ono. I recommended this in another video already. Authored by Takehiko Harada, former president of Toyota Taiwan. And why I picked this book and not the others is that this is one particular element of time orientation that I find very unique and that I didn't so far find in other books. An element, let's say, or let's say a hint at time orientation that I find very interesting. It's in the first chapter, lesson 2. So it's at the beginning of this book. There's this little subchapter called Kaizen equals getting closer to the final process. That may not sound like much, but I think this is an amazing insight about time orientation. Kaizen equals getting closer to the final process, towards the client, the customer, the delivery to the client. Kaizen equals getting closer to the final process. Very interesting thoughts from Taiichi Ono, but articulated by Mr. Harada. And there are a couple of other chapters in this book that are highly relevant to time orientation, like multi-skilling of people, um, reducing batch size, how to organize for flow, the role of top management, and so on. Um, Here, there's a lovely chapter called "Managers are there to create an environment in which increases to flow happen." So this is, I think, you'll find lovely nuggets, very beautifully articulated nuggets about time orientation in this book, which is why I recommend it. Yeah, this is not in its entirety a book about time orientation, not like Mr. Schmenner's book or Rajan Zuri's book or George Stark's book, but you will find a few beautiful nuggets here, and especially this insight about kaizen being meaning moving closer to the last process. Very powerful insight. Very nice book. Highly recommended to read on time orientation as well. So we move forward. This was, I think, published in 2012, and we move forward just 2 years to an author and a topic that we have discussed already in our podcast, in the Beta Codex Live podcast, and the concept that um, I wrote about extensively in the Slave to the Rhythm research paper. And this is really a book totally dedicated to time. It's called, and some of you might know the title already from my recommendations, Lean RFS, Repetitive Flexible Supply, Putting the Pieces Together by Ian Glenday, or Ian Fraser Glenday, written together with Rick Sather. I'm not quite sure about the pronunciation. So this is a book about the Lean RFS approach, which is about time orientation, which is about reducing batch size, which is about organizing the flow and how to make it happen in organizations that cannot move to single piece flow. Um, I think it's a very useful, very focused, much like Rajan Zuri's book on quick response manufacturing that I mentioned. This book is very practical. It's about an approach to time orientation for specific companies. And I think of the books that Ian Fraser Glenday produced, this is the better one, the more interesting, the more densely packed book as well. So yes, I would recommend you to look at this book, number 6 in our list, uh, about lean RFS and how to get to, even if you have large volume manufacturing, if you're in consumer goods and so on, how to get to flow, how to get to time orientation, how to make it happen. Now there's a more complicated book, because this is a book that once you look up time orientation, time-based organizing, you will find this book. It's by Robert Barker, and it's called The Time-Based Organization: Recreating and Transforming Existing Organizations. When I found out about this book, I thought, oh my God, this is it. This might be the whole thing. This might be the breakthrough book. How did I not find this earlier, and so on? And then when I received it, I was totally disappointed. There's a problem with this book by Robert Barker. It was published, by the way, very recently in 2020. Robert Barker, he promises more in the title than he delivers. I think that's one of the key problems with this book. Robert Barker he developed his own approach to analyzing for time compression. So this book is packed with graphics that illustrate, analysis of processes and the waste of time that occurs in them, and how to condense the utilization of time. And he developed this specific way of, depicting time compression, or the potential for time compression and the use of time and so on. Here are two of these graphics on a double page. And so this book is high on analysis, but not high on how to do it, how to organize for flow and time orientation. It says very little, I think, about the last. There is one chapter that talks a little bit about how to make it happen. It's called Chapter 7, Systems That Support Time-Based Organization. And there he reveals something about cellular organization, some thoughts. But I was disappointed. This is more about analytics than about solving problems. And what I have learned from my work with, cell structure design, relative targets, the beta codex overall, and so is analysis is neither the problem nor the solution. Of course, companies need to analyze at a certain point their processes to understand how to compress them in order to bring about an approach like quick response manufacturing. But to dedicate so much energy as Mr. Barker suggests to analyzing processes, I think it's totally superfluous. It means over analyzing things. Yeah. So this is a book that I do not recommend you to buy, except if you think that you want to learn more about how to analyze processes and their time and the waste of time that's happening in common companies and processes. Now we're coming to the eighth book that I would like to talk about, and still think that it's the most powerful book on time orientation that exists, the best book. There's one caveat though. It's not available in English. It's only available in German. It's the book by Ernst Weichselbaum. Some of you who know my work a little bit better have heard about it already. There is a better company in every company. That's the title translated into English. In jedem Unternehmen steckt ein besseres by Ernst Weichselbaum. I published this book together with Ernst in 2020. And even after reviewing all these books that I already mentioned, I still think that this is the most powerful book. Why? On time orientation, right? Why? Because it is loaded with conceptual insight of the practical theory. It is witty in language. It gives time orientation a language. It comes up with wonderful concepts like the OK point, swinging capacity, and so on. All these concepts, or how to compete on time, which is something that George Stork already suggested in the 1990s. And of course, Ernst Weichselbaum at the time already applied these concepts at Bene, producer of office furniture in Austria. So in a way, Ernst Weichselbaum combines all these ideas that I already mentioned, in a beautiful book that's based on witty phrases and quotes, very, very condensed, smart quotes. Again, sadly, the book is not available in English, but if you speak German, you are at a clear advantage. You might try it. You should read it. You must read it. If you do not read German, if you do not speak German, my recommendation is to look at the Slave to the Rhythm research paper, for which I translated a lot of Ernst Weichselbaum quotes. So in this paper, you find a lot of Ernst Weichselbaum thinking and quite a few of his quotes from the book. Yeah, so this is my last title and my recommendation of 8 books about time orientation and time-oriented work systems. You will find details about these books and where to find them in the post, related to this video. I hope you found this beneficial. I hope you will decide to study time-oriented work systems a little further. If you haven't read the research paper "Slave to the Rhythm" by the Beta Codex Network, which I published in June, if you haven't read this paper, I can only highly recommend you, because it, of course, combines most of the ideas, or many of the powerful ideas in all these books. And I think it moves time oriented organizing, thinking forward quite a bit, but that's up to you to decide. Start with the book by George Stork. I recommend reading Roger Schmenner's book that I mentioned. I recommend reading the books on quick response manufacturing and lean RFS. Of course, I recommend reading Ernst Weichselbaum's book, and this research paper here gives a great introduction to most of the themes of those books. Thank you for listening. I hope you found this beneficial. Please comment on this video and share it with people who might be interested. Thank you very much. See you around soon.